welcome everyone to our first BudapestJS meetup of 2021. And it's quite strange to be still talking to the camera instead of people or face-to-face to people, but this is what we have right now. And first and foremost, thank you for joining. I know that it's not the kind of the usual setup, but I still appreciate that you take the time to attend these meetups. And especially a special thanks to our two presenters, who I will introduce later, for doing these talks. Last but not least, a special thanks to our sponsors. I would start with Prisma, because thanks to them, we have this professional setup for the meetup. So streaming, background, everything. You guys don't see that part, but we do, and it's awesome. So thanks again, Prisma, Natalia, and Alex for helping us out with this. And special thanks goes to JetBrains as well, because thanks to them, we will have raffle prizes for you to win at the end of this event. And that will be roughly, I would say, in an hour. You will get the details later on how you can win, but you have to stay tuned for that. And we will have two additional sponsors for this evening. One would be Interticket, so they provided the time for Danny to prepare his presentation, and we also have GoodGrind as a sponsor who provided support in making the event happen, and also providing a talk through our beloved György. So I would say first topic will be a short talk from Alex from Prisma. He will give just a short intro on what you can do with Prisma. Some of you might already be aware of it because it's quite a popular OSS framework library for Node.js. But if you're not, I would say for sure it will help you in the long run. And afterwards, we will have György as a first speaker. So compared to kind of the titles of the slides, there's a bit of a mix-up here because Danny is still charging his headset, most likely. Yeah, after György, we will only have a short break, so like a couple of minutes for everyone to grab a drink or so. And afterwards, we continue with the second talk. And after the second talk, we will have the raffle for the prizes. After each talk, you will have the chance to ask questions. How you can do it is just write it in the YouTube chat, and we will show those, and the speakers will answer your questions. So I would say without further ado, let's get started. Alex, I hand over the stage to you.
Hi. Let me just share my screen 1 minute. Sorry. Sorry for the mix-up. I'm a little nervous. So yeah, let's get on the road. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm a developer advocate at Prisma. Today, I'll give you a brief overview what Prisma is and the tools and frameworks that it can work with. So, moment as well to bring up my slides. So, what is Prisma? Prisma is an ORM that makes working with databases fun. I'll also say that Prisma makes it easy for developers to think about the database queries by providing a type-safe and clean API for submitting your database queries that return JavaScript objects. At the moment, Prisma currently supports 4 databases, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MS SQL, which is currently in preview, and SQLite. Soon, there may be a connector for MongoDB. So Prisma is comprised of 3 main components: the Prisma client, Prisma Migrate, and Prisma Studio. The Prisma client is an intuitive and type-safe ORM that is based off of your Prisma schema and allows you to interact with your database. Prisma Migrate is a database tool, a migration tool that makes it easy to evolve your database schema. And Prisma Studio is a data browser for viewing and interacting with your application data. You can think of Prisma Studio as a modern PHP MyAdmin. And yeah, so what are the benefits of Prisma? So Prisma offers two main benefits. One is higher productivity, and two is increased confidence. It's achieved in a number of ways. One, Prisma allows you to think in objects instead of mapping relational data. It allows you to think in queries and not classes, and therefore helps you avoid complex model objects. It also offers you a type-safe database queries that is validated at compile time, and some IntelliSense on your VS Code when you're working with the client. And the Prisma schema offers you a single source of truth for your database and application models as well. So where does Prisma fit, really? So Prisma fits in with any your favorite API technology or library or framework. This means it's REST with Express, Fastify, Happy, name it, it works. Also works with beautifully with GraphQL, and you can still use Prisma in your full stack with frameworks such as Nest, Blitz.js, Redwood, and Next. Lastly, Dr. Stephen Jensen recently published a course called End-to-End React with Prisma 2 that is available on Udemy. You can get access to it free of charge by entering the code end-to-end APR 13. The 100% discount code will be active till tomorrow, and we'll definitely drop the link in the YouTube chat. If you are interested in learning more about Prisma, head over to prisma.io/docs and get started and learn more about Prisma. Try it out and let us know what you think. Thank you. That will be it. Let me bring back Nobert. Yes.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the intro. I'm very happy to hear that now you guys will have Microsoft SQL support, because that was something we were very much in need of in one of our projects. So that's great to hear.
The SQL Server is available, but it's currently in preview. Hopefully, it will go to be production ready soon. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's really great.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. And as you guys heard, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or just go to Prisma.io and join the community there. And our first speaker of the evening is György. If you've participated in some of the meetups already in the past, or BudapestJS meetups, or just checked out our YouTube channel, you already saw György in action. He's a frequent presenter of the meetup. I'm very happy to have him here yet again, because he has a very special, I would say, special attitude and approach to doing presentations, which are really funny and still very informative. What you need to know about György is that he's a cat guy, not a dog guy. I'm sure he doesn't hate dogs, but he has a cat. And he's very much into computers and computer science. So he's always going into in-depth topics. You saw the cat as well. Thanks, Gyuri. So today we will go a bit more in-depth into database stuff. And I hope you guys will learn something new, because I'm sure you will learn something new. I already had a sneak peek of the whole thing. So Gyuri, the stage is yours. Thanks again for doing this talk.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Norbert. Let me just share my screen, because then you can actually see the presentation. Oh. Okay. Right, this is easier live, trust me on that. Okay, everything is visible, hopefully. Someone let me know. Okay, seems it is, right. So, my name is Kovács György. I'm tech lead at GoodGrind. And that's the introduction I'm going to give you today. That's all. But what I want to talk about today is Knext.js. And before I mentioned anything about the library itself, let me give you some context on the project we used it on, which is named TPM, short for TV Process Manager. Not a very imaginative title, but a very appropriate one. The idea here is that our client, which is an advertising agency group of some description, wants to use it to digitalize all of their TV advertising related processes. So everything we can do automatically, we should. That's the broad concept. Now, one interesting aspect to it, which was also surprising to me, is the granularity of data that they're working with when it comes to reporting. So, for example, they know that, for example, let's say 0.3% of all women aged between 18 and 49 who also have a dog but not a cat that were watching the advertisement running on channel Awesome at 11:53 a.m. or something like that. That's one end of the scale. And on the other end of the scale, we have yearly reports that aggregate all of this data to figure out whether a specific advertising campaign over or underperformed. Now, if we just to go with some ballpark estimates, that means we need to track 100 channels, each running 500 spots a day. And then this is broken down into 200 target audiences that we care about. And for reporting purposes, we need to retain 2 years worth of data. So if you combine all of this together, we end up with roughly 7.3 billion ratings that we need to consider. Now, if we just use 1 byte to store every single piece of data here, that's already 7.3 gigabytes. That's a lot of gigabytes, or, well, a fair amount anyway. So with the scale of data, we had some interesting challenges, and part of the solution there is Knext.js. So what even is that? Let me just give you a brief introduction there. It's, well, the title or the tagline goes, it's a batteries included query builder, but the name itself should be a clue. It connects you to your database. That's the idea. It's super simple. You just use it and then you can query stuff from the database. That's it, nothing more. So database independence is one feature it has. So you are free to care about the database specific issues, and it makes your life easier when it comes to building SQL queries. And it also has a whole bunch of other bits and shits we're not really going to talk about here, but they round up the whole package nicely. So what does this look like in practice? On the left-hand side, you have here a SQL query. It's fairly standard. We select a single column from a single table and do some filtering as well. In Knext, this would look something like this. Now, you might think that the only thing I've done here is just add a bunch of parentheses and apostrophes around everything, and otherwise, what is really the point? But there is a subtle but important shift that happens between the two. On the SQL command text level, we're dealing with the textual representation of the query. On the Knext level, we are actually dealing with an abstracted logical representation of it, kind of like, think of it like the source text and the abstract syntax tree. Now you care about what pieces you put together to form the query and not necessarily what kind of specific characters have to follow one another. If this seems a bit too abstract so far, it will make sense eventually, trust me. But suffice to say, this is one thing that gives Knext the ability to be database independent, since you no longer care about how the query itself is represented in the database level. You can just put it together from sort of more abstract building blocks. Like this goes in the select. This is what I want to filter for. So why did we end up choosing this library for this specific project? Why not just go with well, the first obvious choice would be just SQL text. That's the very low level command interface that we have for the database. We could have done that. Well, that obviously has security and correctness issues when you're just using string manipulation to put together your commands that you execute against the database. little Bobby tables, you know, that story that's not a fun place to be in. But even aside from that, if it's not texture manipulating, but higher level function calls, methods, then it becomes easier to reach to your usual tools for code reuse and function decomposition. So if you have a reusable SQL snippet, then you can just put that into a function, add parameters to it, and so on. You can do the same thing in the database level as well with views, stored procedures, which is a bit more cumbersome. Sometimes it is necessary and unavoidable, but certainly this is a more flexible and comfortable option for at least those of us working in JavaScript and whatnot. So the not transact SQL or whatever, PL SQL or whatever they call their database specific programming languages that you have for every different database vendor, because of course they have to be different. Okay, so that's one advantage of a query builder. Now, why not go with an ORM solution? Well, the thing there is then we would be able to, like SQLize, for example, we would be able to just throw entities at the database and they are magically persisted, and you don't care or don't even know how that happens as far as the SQL is concerned. And in our case, that's exactly the problem. That with this level of data, you do genuinely care, do deeply genuinely care what exactly is happening at the database level. Because if you don't, you're going to be missing an index, you're going to have the query optimizer fall on its face, and suddenly your performance goes to shit. So to avoid these problems, we need full control over what happens at the database. And with a query builder, you get that. Now, the third alternative, and I swear I did not know Prisma.io was going to be a sponsor before I put this up on the slide. Why not use Prisma.io? Well, the reason is simple. At the point where we started this project, it did not support Microsoft SQL Server. That is what we use in production, so it's out of the question right off the bat. But aside from that, it still has a bit of a difference when or Knext still has somewhat of an advantage. And that is when it comes to raw queries. Now, the idea of raw queries might seem a bit strange, like why are you using a query builder if you want to run text as SQL queries anyway? And the reason is that however general your API is, it will not be able to cover absolutely every feature of every database out there, and that is fine. So sometimes you need an escape hatch like this. The difference is that with Prisma, as far as I know, maybe this has also changed since then, this is an all or nothing type deal. Either you use their API and just use nice object and relational based query creation, or you just pass in a string and then that gets executed. With Knext, it is all the way through a query builder, so you are not escaping from the query structure itself. That means it's even there when you're writing raw queries. So you can just take one of those tiny little building blocks, which would go into the select clause or a join condition or a var filter or whatever, and then replace just that tiny little part with raw SQL. So this modularity gives you a lot more usability. You don't have to pick and choose between one or the other option. You can more easily migrate from one to the other. All right, so that is why we picked Knext. Now, I would like to talk about some of the different things we did on this project, which might not be so obvious. This is not something you're going to see in the getting started documentation or in tutorials or whatnot. That doesn't mean they're super complicated or anything, but nonetheless, seems to be okay. This seems to be somewhat possibly intriguing. So maybe for your use case, it's not really worth your time, but nonetheless, these are some ideas to consider. So one thing is that Knext by default has a primarily string-based API. So every parameter you can think of, if it's column reference, it's going to be a string. If it's a table reference, that's also a string. If it's a string value, that's also a string. So, okay, there's a number here on this slide. That should have been a string too. But either way, primarily everything is just expressed as a string, expressed as a string, which is fine. It's super easy to use. However, this is anything but type safe as a result. So Prisma already had a decent idea for that. You look at the database schema, generate a bunch of constants from that, and there you go. You use those instead. We can do that even with whatever tool Knext provides fairly easily. So in this case, you no longer have the option or even the choice of accidentally introducing a typo to a column reference and then having your queries break in the most inopportune times. Furthermore, this gives you a confidence when you're doing refactoring at the database level. You can just rename columns or even drop them. Once these generated constants are refreshed, you will notice that the compiler is suddenly complaining about a missing property. And as you might expect, you also get autocomplete in this case. So effectively, this gives you strong typing based on the database schema. Now, this is all fine and dandy if you're including every table just once in your query, but sometimes you need to join the same table twice. The way you do that in SQL is you give an alias to that specific instance of table so you can reference it that way. Now, this is something we could do for you with pre-generated constants. So in this case, you generate your own. You have the schema for a table, give it a name, and store it in a variable. Afterwards, you can just reference this variable like you would any other table, or just similar to the built-in constants. Third addition or extra that we were using is the utility functions for row queries. So one thing to know that yes, we did need to use row queries in the project in a couple of places. That doesn't mean you have to do so like a savage just with string concatenation. There are civilized ways to do this. So let's look at what row syntax looks like in Knext to begin with. It's not necessarily the friendliest. There are always two parts to row query. First is the SQL command text, where you can, or where you have to replace the bindings with placeholders, and then an array of bindings, which are the actual values that get put into the SQL. So, okay, it functionally it has everything it needs, but this is anything but user-friendly. Thankfully, JavaScript has a neat little function named tagged template expressions. Now, a template expression is something you've probably already seen. It's a string with those weird little backtick quotes and whatnot, and you can put expressions inside of them. And at the end of the day, all of the things that are in there get converted to a string and concatenated, and that's your final output. So that's an easy way of mixing just plain text and various expressions. Now, that's kind of what we want to do here as well, just output a different format. And JavaScript gives you a tool for that, which is tag template literals or tag template expressions. The only thing you have to do is add the tag, which is actually a function, before the template literal, and then instead of the concatenation logic, you can do whatever you want with these pieces of text and the expressions. So in this example, the second line just produces the exact expression you see above it. That's it. Now we can add additional utility functions built on top of this for specific use cases, such as function calls. Well, it's primarily just a function name and a list of arguments. So if you can specify that, you're already good. And thanks to the magic of function binding, you can easily create your own function wrapper for just the specific function. So you don't have to specify the function name every single time. Now, a third and final example here is row template literals, which again, the usual syntax is kind of awkward. The purpose of this is to define a value that is definitely going to be a string. It's not ever possible for this to be a column reference or whatever based on the context. This is always going to be just a string literal. And I think that's pretty much the only valid usage that you see in reasonable code. But well, this is very cumbersome syntax for something super simple. So we just add the wrapper for it. So you only specify the string you want to convert, and then there you go. So now, on a bit of a different track, this is not really an addition to Knext, but how we organize the code is somewhat different than you might expect. So you might see in a lot of getting started guides and whatnot that the builder syntax just follows the exact structure of the SQL query you're going to build. So the select statement is at the top, then you have a from and a join to take the data from two tables related in a certain way, and then add some filtering on both of them. Now the thing is that with a query builder, you're creating a query from logical building blocks anyway. So while you can do it this way, you don't have to. And since many of these operators are context independent or even order independent in some cases, you have considerable freedom in rearranging them. So if you take this same query and just reorder a bunch of stuff into the way the actual processing pipeline will work, you get something like this. First, you define your first source table, then the filtering on it, and then some transformation on its output. Then after all of that, you join in the second table. Again, define the filtering on that table and the output transformation for that table. Now, the useful thing here is that now the related code that is dealing with data from the same table or tables is located next to each other. And that also means that you can just take this part. Hopefully, it's not just a coincidence that they're together, but it also represents some kind of business use case or like some small version of a business requirement, in this case, including the address for each person. And then you can just shuffle this out to a function. And thanks to Knext being awesome, you can even use this inline. So this way, you have managed to introduce higher level, hopefully business relevant building blocks into your query builders, but you still have all the power that you did before, just on a higher abstraction level. So that's as far as query construction goes. Now, the other major tool we built is, well, dealing with the database schema directly. This is kind of similar to, I don't even remember what it's called in Prisma, actually. Not the client, but kind of the same thing. So the first step in getting useful data out of the database schema is extracting the schema somehow. Thankfully, there are system tables in most every database, certainly a SQL server, which lets you run SQL queries against them to actually get the metadata from the database. So that way you can extract the list of tables, columns, indexes, foreign keys, primary keys, pretty much anything you could ever want to know about the database. And if you've done all that, you can package that together into a reasonably human-friendly, but more importantly, computer-comparable JSON file. And then you have a snapshot of the database schema. Then one thing you can do with it, and one thing that we actually do with this, is schema validation. Now, to understand what this refers to, first I need to explain a bit about how Knext handles different database version upgrades. The migration process there involves a bunch of steps where you can define basically an arbitrary piece of code which will take your database from the current version to the next and hopefully keep all of your data. And then you can define a different piece of code that does the same thing in reverse. And there you go, that's a migration. You have an up step and a down step. Now, the problem with this is that you're always defining deltas and you're writing code, so therefore it's prone to having bugs. But the thing you care about is actually the end result of running said migrations. And that is where the schema snapshot comes in. Once you've done your migration, you can take a snapshot of the actual state of the database, compare that to an expected state you have checked into Git. And there you go. If the two are the same, everything went fine. If not, you probably screwed up somewhere. So the third and probably most interesting aspect of this tool is code generation. So now we have the schema as a friendly JSON that we can iterate over. It's pretty easy to generate basically anything you could want out of it. Now, the things we do generate, well, let's start with reference helpers. You've already seen those. These are the pre-generated constants for accessing different columns. Now, you might expect these to just be of the form table.column as a string, but the reality is a bit more complicated than that. We actually wrap everything in Knext.ref objects, and the reason for that has to do with a minor quirk of the Knext API. So, as you might have noticed, everything is strings, so that means sometimes you need to be able to choose whether that string means a column reference or whether it is a literal string value. And that also depends on the context and position of the arguments. Let's take this where clause, for example. The first part references a column, and the second part is a value that it gets compared to. So far, so good. Now, if we also take a look at a join call, the first argument is going to be the table we're joining, so ignore that. But the second one is going to always reference the column, and the third one is also going to reference the column. So far, so good. However, as far as SQL is concerned, it's also entirely valid to do it the other way, where both sides of a where clause reference a column, or a join condition happens to join a column and a constant value. So you might try to naively do something like this, change the value to something that looks like a column, or change the column that's something that looks like a value, but unfortunately, this won't work. As far as Knext is concerned, they're just strings, so it has absolutely no way of telling them apart. So what you do need to do in this case is have a wrapper object, which can then be recognized at least. For columns, this is going to be a Knext.ref, and for literals, this is going to be a Knext.raw wrapper object. So, long story short, this is why we generate reference objects instead of strings, so you don't have to care about this at all. You're just free to use them in whatever position you want. Now, the next thing we generate is ID types. And again, I have to take a detour, this time into the lens of structural typing. So TypeScript by default uses structural typing, which, as you might guess from the name, looks at the contents or structure of a type to determine if it's compatible with another type. This is opposed to nominal typing, found in quite a bit of other languages, where you only check the name of the type to see if they are compatible. So in TypeScript, the following code is entirely legal. Let's suppose you have an interface, you're dealing with animals which have a name and a weight, and your code is also concerned with household appliances which also have a name and a weight, but the two are otherwise unrelated. So you can create an object of one kind and one of the other, and it's perfectly valid to assign one to the other. So now your cat is a toaster, which may or may not be what you want. Now, with nominal typing, this assignment would be impossible, or rather compile time error. And in TypeScript, you have to do a bit of legwork to actually get this to work. The way you do that is this. Now look at the magic. The right side is a bit cryptic, but all it says is this has the same properties as the original base type, which is represented by T in this case, and it also has a type name field, which is some kind of string. So after you have this, you can declare your types as nominal by declaring the base type and some unique identifier. You can use this then to create values of these types. You have to add the cast there to actually allow this. Note that this cast is not a force cast in the sense that it will only accept values that actually belong to the base type. So this will work for numbers, but not for strings, which is exactly what we want. And then the following assignment will throw a compile time error saying that the type name properties are incompatible, which is exactly what you want. So, as you might guess from the title, this comes in handy for database IDs, where pretty much every ID in your database is just going to be a number, but regardless, you don't want to pass a person ID where you expect an address ID. So that saves you from some class of errors, which is always nice. Third thing we generate is interfaces for the database records themselves. By that I mean the rows in a specific table. So if we have a table, it has a bunch of columns with different types. Then we generate a corresponding JavaScript interface where the ID or the primary key will become an ID type. The types in the database are transformed to their JavaScript equivalents, and the property names are converted from snake case to camel case. Simple as that. Now, we do a bunch of straightforward type mapping, but also some custom conversions in some cases, which you can see with the ID type. So not every integer is obviously going to be converted to an ID type, just certain ones. And going further than this, you could even write or even generate the conversion code for taking the raw objects that Knext returns and converting them to, well, whatever interface you happen to be generating here. That's useful, for example, for the types, the database types, which do not have a straightforward JavaScript equivalent. For example, in the database, you have dates, times, date time offsets, where in the JavaScript side, by default, you only have a single date type. Now, if you want to use custom types to represent all of these on the JavaScript side as well, which definitely has its uses, then that is the kind of conversion logic you could add here. In our case, we never actually implemented this. We just use a global generic converter stuff, which handles 90% of the cases and then do the rest manually. Now, another cool addition that you can have here based on the schema is relationship traversal. So if you're going to do a join from from one table to another, as far as SQL is concerned, you can join on any column and any condition. But the vast majority of the time, you're going to be navigating using a foreign key from one entity to another. And if you inspect the schema, you will have the list of foreign keys there, and you can also look at the unique constraints on various tables to figure out whether said relation is a one-to-one or a one-to-many relationship, and then just generate a bunch of helper code based on that, so you can navigate directly from a table using the name of a relationship to another table, and then that will add the joins to your query as needed. Now, the code for this looks something like this. In our case, it was never actually implemented, but it's a cool idea nonetheless. Maybe we'll get around to it sometime. So that's a very brief tour of the features and stuff that we did with Knext in our project. And I also have a couple of ideas about these ideas. First is that code generation is actually a surprisingly powerful and useful tool in some cases. So if you don't want to touch the resulting generated code at all manually, and it's going to be static after it's generated, then yeah, you should maybe consider making more use of it. It's not exactly panacea, so it will not solve all your problems, but the amount of effort you need to do some fairly useful stuff, well, it can be worth it in some cases. So definitely add this to your toolbox, I would say. Now, the other thought I had is, have we just built an ORM ourselves from the ground up? Like, what was the point of that? And I would argue, no, not really. Because every abstraction presented so far here is fairly straightforward, simple, and more importantly, granular. So it's just tiny building blocks put on top of one another. If you happen to need something slightly different, than what is there in a utility function, you can just take those 4 or 5 lines that make up that utility function and modify it to your heart's liking. You still have the full control over what happens at every step of the way. This is in contrast to an ORM, where if you want to do something that's not the default behavior, you're gonna have a bad time. Third is that now we have managed to create a whole bunch of tools whereby you can easily express fairly complex queries. The problem with that is that people make use of this power and actually do create rather complex queries. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I've pulled out a real-life query from our real running application. Actually, I just searched for what is the slowest query that we have, and this one is it. Yeah, so if you're getting to this point, it's time to stop. Because if you ever want to debug or maintain or optimize this query, you have your work cut out for you. So that's something to still keep in mind. To close it off, here's a bunch of puns I chose not to use for this presentation because it was getting pretty annoying already. And that's enough for silliness. Time for some super serious questions. If you have any.
Thanks, György, for the talk. We actually do have questions, and you can still write those questions in the comment section on YouTube. While you do that, I'll start with a question from my side. In hindsight, do you think, would you still start with, I'm going to go now down the path of heresy on a JavaScript meetup with JavaScript, or would you pick something else in general?
Well, I don't think this is, I'm not sure if this is actually related to the talk or Knext.js specifically, but here the difficulty had nothing to do with JavaScript specifically. Like, yes, it's a dynamic language, but we use TypeScript anyway. We generate strongly typed stuff, which is tied to the database schema anyway. So you could do this in pretty much any language. I think on the Java side, Juke looks something fairly similar to this, and that's not JavaScript. As for whether I would pick JavaScript for the project itself, I don't know.
The reason I asked, because I would say in the past, the whole ORM and relational database management story of Node.js was pretty sad. So we had SQLize and Knext beta, and more or less the rest of the libraries were still either in an early phase or just one-man shows, kind of. This is why I asked.
Well, the only comparison I have is the entity framework from quite a few years ago when I worked with it in C#. That's the standard Microsoft endorsed ORM there, which does everything wonderfully out of the box. And it was still a fucking pain in the ass to actually get it to produce fast queries on an insane data set. So we ran into the same problem here. I think it's kind of a conceptual problem with ORMs in general, that you can't really have the same level of control as you do with a query builder. Now that you don't even have the choice of a decent ORM on Node.js, that might be another sad story. But Prisma is here, so maybe that will solve our problems. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm hopeful for it as well. We have a question on the YouTube chat side. Can we bring that up somehow here? I think last time. Awesome. Judge, you can read that, right?
Yes.
Performance-wise, how this is performing.
The question is not even wrong, is how I would go. But it is a good question. This is a query builder. This lets you take an object structure and it spits out a SQL query. You can just create whatever query you want with it. The question is whether that query will end up performing properly in the database, and that's something you need to answer elsewhere. So if you have the proper indexes in place, the proper data structures, then yes, you can achieve as much performance as you would read just plain SQL queries, just writing the text yourself. So this is not going to be the bottleneck of any kind.
So we can say that in this situation, it's up to you, the developer, while if you're using, let's say, an ORM, like you mentioned, entity manager, that tries to do some magic behind the scene, and it will either help you or make your life miserable.
Yeah, exactly. So there is no magic between you and the database. You can fuck up your performance exactly how you want, or it can be as awesome as you can make it.
We also have another question from Christian. What do you think of standard JS? Hi, Christian, by the way.
Yes. Old colleagues. So I don't really have an opinion on that. I don't even know off the top of my head what it precisely is. I think it's just a collection of linter rules in the end. Or maybe I'm mistaken and that's not what it is, because the name is not very descriptive. But
yeah,
yeah,
it should be just linter and formatting and whatever. So a bunch of.
I mean, I think linting is useful, but again, that's not really where the most problems come from, in my opinion. If you just pick one standard, whatever it is, it can be a standard rule set for TS-lint, ES-lint, JS-lint, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just pick one and go with it. There you go.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? 3.
You can also ask about SQL performance issues if you want. I have another presentation on that, but that has nothing to do with JavaScript. So
okay, if you're interested about that topic, drop a note in the chat, so Gyuri will know to create a talk about that one as well.
Yeah, you can see my email there in very small letters, but there it is.
Yes. And also, if you have any more questions at the end of the whole session, you can still ask Gyuri. For now, thank you, Gyuri, again for doing the talk. And we'll switch to Dani. So meanwhile, we do that whole magic thing. You guys can grab a drink or something. It should take a minute or so to prepare Dani. Hi, Dani. Can you hear us?
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yeah, everything is great.
Cool.
We see you, we hear you perfectly.
Awesome.
You have everything ready to get started?
Yes, I do.
Great. So just give me 10 seconds more. So now we will share a link in the chat section on YouTube. That's basically a Google form. If you would like to have the chance to win one of the JetBrains licenses, so it's a license offered by JetBrains, which you can use to redeem any of their products. The best bang for your buck is more or less the Ultimate Edition. That's like a live pro tip, but it's up to you at the end of the day. So just fill in that Google form. Essentially, it asks for your name and email. I need an email because that's where I will send the coupon you can use. Afterwards, I will delete the whole thing, so don't need to worry about GDPR. I'm not going to spam you or anything, but I need to verify you somehow. So if you're not interested, don't sign up. But yeah, please do so. And that after Dani's talk, I will do a public raffle so you can see my hands that I'm not cheating. Okay, so Dani, thanks again for agreeing or volunteering to do a talk. For those of you who don't know Dani, he's actually, I would say, relentlessly pushing forward when it comes to improving things. So he's really the person who tries to get everyone out of a kind of a status quo and to always push everything to a better state. His first talk at the JavaScript Meetup was also about solving an issue that he had and others have as well. You can check out his talk on our YouTube channel, and you will see that during his talk as well that he is a guy who kind of innovates on things and builds things. And I would say more or less he's also a real-life adventurer and avid reader. So Donny, thanks again for doing the talk, and I hand over the stage to you.
Thank you, Norby. Welcome, everyone. I will start with a little introduction about me. So I started learning JavaScript in the middle of 2018, and first I learned React.js and Node.js, and I landed my first job soon after as an Angular developer. So I was working in front end, but that was not enough for me. So in my free time, I was also experimenting with different technologies within JavaScript. I tried so in my last talk, I was talking about sort of a mobile application. It was running in the browser, so it was not really mobile, but it was an audiobook player app. And since then, I've been experimenting with cross-platform solutions as well with Angular, because I really grew to like the framework and all the benefits that it offers. And after a few years, well, like a year and a half or 2 years of experimenting, I came to a stack that I really enjoy using. I see a lot of potential in, and tonight I'm going to share you the combination of these technologies that I have been employing the past couple of months, almost a year now. So can we share my screen? Oh, okay, I have to click, I guess, share screen. Okay. All right, perfect. So this technology is nothing else than the combination of 3 frameworks. One of them is, of course, Angular for the front-end development. The other one is Knext.js. It's a backend framework that is built on Express, or you can actually use Fastify as well, which makes it even faster. And then the other framework that makes it possible to build native mobile applications is Ionic and actually Capacitor. So right here, you see my IDE, and I have a project that we will do sort of a live code review session here, and I will walk you through of what I've been working on since last summer. But first, so what do we have here? Well, I've been always fascinated with developing applications, so not really websites, but real apps instead. And here, last summer, I started experimenting with these tools, and I really found them enjoyable to use. And what do I want to achieve with this? Well, it's all just one language, and Angular and Nest are built in a similar fashion. They are modular, very well scalable in terms of development. And with this, you can build to the web, you can build to iOS, and you can also build Android apps with just one single code base, so that you can deliver mobile applications real quick. And right here, this is actually a base. So here we have a couple of projects. Right now I have 4 different applications. and then they have a shared base where there are all kinds of different stuff implemented, so that if I want to make, let's say, a 5th mobile application or cross-platform application, I can just add it here into the projects folder, and then I have access to a lot of really good stuff that I don't need to implement over and over again for each new application. So what do I have here? Well, I have some backend libraries, and I also have some front-end related code, and you will soon learn why this is so handy. In the backend, I have an authentication implemented with user management. I have an adapter for MongoDB and also for SQL. So all the schemas are implemented, and if I start a new app, I already have user management, login, and email sending, and all of that stuff implemented, so I don't need to do it again. And in the front end part, like UI and core folders, I have a bunch of animations, native functionalities like keyboard or haptics, and so on. And of course, a UI kit. So let me show you what I really like about Knext.js, which is the backend side of the app. So this is the shared place, and this is what all the apps build on. And here in the modules section, I already have access to a push notifications module, email sending client, and databases for MongoDB and SQL. So these are the modules itself that make the connection. And what might be interesting is the authentication part, which has implementations for both MongoDB and SQL, which is, by the way, I'm using an ORM, so it could be, I'm using MySQL, but you could use different SQL databases. And the way it works, I have a global configuration for each application. You can set up which type of DB you use, and then it loads the correct module for that particular DB. So for example, for SQL, we are using Sequelize, and of course, because it's Nest.js, it's super TypeScript. It's like using all the brand new features of TypeScript, including decorators and the Angular's service and module architecture. And I think what's interesting here is that this is the repository layer, but I think what's really good is the models themselves, which must be somewhere. Let's see. User model. There we go. So this is a regular TypeScript class with some decorators, and the database schema itself is declared just like a simple class, which makes it really easy to read and easy to interact with. And it's also yeah, I forgot what I wanted to say, but it's good to use. But of course, it does have some limitations. And we also have the same thing for MongoDB. We have a very similar syntax, and it is declared as such Okay, so that's for the repository layer. Of course, it has its limitations, and if you need to write something more performant, you can always write a row query if it's needed. But most of the cases, it works quite well. So I've been also talking about that each application has its own configuration. So it's because you need to build for two platforms, Android and iOS. They each have their own configuration files. It's quite hard to keep all the configurations in sync, especially when you want to build one of the applications and then you need to switch to another app. And for this reason, I've created a CLI tool with which you can set the configuration for each app. So this is one of my hobby projects, but I also work on two applications that will be soon available in production. One of them is a gym app, and the other one is a property management application. And for the gym app, you will soon see some demos. I will show you how it looks and what you can achieve with this kind of technology. So the gym app is, I only developed the front end of it, and the other one, the property management app, I also developed the backend for it. And here I have all of course, I changed the values so that you can't really copy it. You can try though, it doesn't matter. And so I can just easily set up and change all the variables, even depending on the different environments that I'm using it. So it can have a different set of configurations for each environment. Right now, it only has development and the default, which is the staging environment. And when I run the script for the configuration setting, it will generate all the files like the proxy config, the native configs, and it will get everything ready so that you can start developing and you can switch between apps very easily. So let me show you how. Let's start one of these applications. So I type in this is the script. I have an alias, so it's just a shortcut. This is the application name, and let's start it in mock. And then it will shortly start up. And of course, this is a work in progress. So just lately, I did a big refactoring. I separated the base app and all the different projects so that the base app is a repository and all the different projects are in different GitHub repositories, so that if somebody else joins me in working one of the projects that I work on, I don't have to share all the source code with everybody. I only share the source code for the base app, which is general files that are not specific to any of the applications, and then I invite them for just one of the repositories. And I'm using something similar to submodules, but I'm not actually using Git submodules because I found it an overhead, but I'm just manually maintaining the repositories. And we can see that it's building, generating the bundles. And if everything is working correctly, we will see the application load up in the browser. Now, of course, when you're done developing, you can always create a native bundle, and you can deploy it to your mobile phone, or you can even install the app, the frame on your phone, and you can see your app live. So you can develop and check the functions lively. You don't have to build every time, which makes it really easy to develop, because when I'm trying out native functionalities, I can just quickly save on my files and it will rebuild it. And within a few seconds, I see the results. So this is pretty basic. I have some animations. If you see how it loads and the toolbar and the bottom bar kind of floats in. And I have a couple of menu points, which also have some cool animations. We can swipe. We can create some stuff, and which might be noteworthy is this swipe-based animation, which is also tied to the routing. So this was some of the harder parts to implement, but it works really well, and it's possible thanks to the really good tools that Ionic gives you. It has some good gesture-based animation tools, and I'm using those to make this swiping-like animation. Let's see what else. Let's see what kind of animations we have here. Okay, let's go back. And let me open one. Let's go to the groups. And here, which I really like, this is one of the cool animations that I made, is when we switch to edit mode and all these things, they go together. Now you can't save if you don't have any items. Well, they all disappeared because this is mock and they all have the same IDs, so it just made them disappear. So you can create pretty good stuff that it's not laggy. It doesn't feel much different than a native application, but it does give you the benefit of not having to write the code for both platforms. And even if you do that, you still need to write a third application that you can deploy to the web. And this way you can do all this at once. Let's see. I have some other cool animations that I want to show you, and then I will also show you some code too. So this one took me like 3 days to make this, but it takes some time, it takes some learning and experimenting. And the goal of this whole thing that I'm working on, is to get to the point when I will have most of the things that someone could need in a web application, in a mobile application, and I will have a library or some piece of code for everything, so that I don't have to focus on learning how all this stuff works. I will already have the services and the modules that I need, and I can just put the pieces together. And of course, there's always need for some customization, but it comes really handy. So for the last part, I will show you this other app. It's called, it's this one, HeartMind. I decided to make this 2 weeks ago, and well, it's nothing too much, but I made it in 2 days. I decided on Friday morning, and by Saturday night, I had the backend deployed to Heroku, and I had the front end working with it. So how does it look? it's using the API that I have, so I didn't have to write one single line code of for implementing user handling. So I could focus on writing the logic for the app itself. It has two important folders. One of them is the API folder, which has the backend code, and this is Angular's modular architecture that we separate the code into 3 different parts. Service layer, which is kind of the business logic. We have the repository layer, which you already saw in the authentication module. So this is everything related to data persistence, accessing and saving data. This is the service layer, which is, well, it's right now it's just a proxy to the repository layer, nothing crazy here. And we have the controller layer, which is responsible for receiving the API calls. And this is how a controller looks like in Nest.js. Super simple. You have the path here. You have the request methods, and in this context interface, there is the user object. So the user ID and all the data that we need is already extracted from the authentication token, and we can start working with it from here. So this is where the front-end app meets the backend, and let me take you to the front-end part. So this was the API folder, and now we look into the SRC, and here lies the front-end part. This is just the core stuff, the application itself, and in the modules part, it has an authentication component and the application itself, which is, again, very, very simple. It has a service layer, source service especially. This is responsible for receiving the data from the backend. So this is kind of like the controller, but on the front-end part. This is where these two meet. And here is a simple service that requests and stores the data and returns it to the components when they need it. And I have 2 views. I have a kind of a welcome screen, and in the welcome screen, they enter some stuff they want to do. And then in the item view screen, you can track how often you do something like it's for building habits. You will see very soon how it looks like. So you saw this Dream app. Now let's start up the other application. And actually, this one I will start in development mode. So it will also start the backend and the front end all at once. And once the script starts, I will be ready and I can start development. I don't have to do anything else, which comes really handy. So this can also build production builds. It copies all the native configs, so it's really useful, and it's really needed for developing apps like this, because otherwise you would have a lot of manual steps. And it takes some time, of course, while it compiles all the code. In the meanwhile, we can explore some of the front-end code that we have in the libraries. So one thing is the animations folder, which is like one of the most visible parts of the app, which makes it look cooler. But then there are also a lot of useful directives that add on special features to each component. For example, this is this pick and hide directive, which you saw here. It's actually this, it's responsible for this animation logic. And it has a couple of different gesture listeners, which is provided by Ionic. And then it builds the animation based on the gesture and whether now it's closed. So whether whether it was visible or closed, so it was a close or open animation. So here we have the app loaded in. Let me just quickly log out, which is not yet implemented. So I just clear the local storage, the token, and reload. And right now we have a very basic login screen. No logo yet. And we will create an account. My password is ASD 3 times, by the way. We log in, and we have logged in through the API, so the backend is running locally right now. Well, we have registered, and well, it's very basic. It's just a simple CRUD, something you want to learn through action. What could it be? Let's say I want to wash my dishes every day. Okay, so that the dirty dishes won't compile up in the kitchen, which is pretty annoying after a while. I click on continue, and then okay, I made a typo, whatever. And then here I can just kind of click this little heart icon if I did it today, and I click on this square if I didn't do it. And well, it's just for showcasing, so it's pretty basic. It doesn't even check if you already entered something the same day or not. You can see the date below it, and in the bottom there is a little like statistics, how many times you did it, like achievements, and how many times you did wash your dish in a row. And once you complete one of the columns, you can proceed to the next stage, which is not yet implemented. So this is all that is. And you can also revert if you misclick, you can undo your logs. And you can see that in the network tab, each time we click, a new call is made to the API, and then it gets updated. So if I reload the app, it requests all the data that I have and loads in. So, well, basically this is what you can achieve. It looks pretty basic. And for the last part, I can show you something that looks more like a native application. So on this one, I've been working, actually this is the first app that the second one that I started working on, and this is the property management app, and it will be in production somewhere sometime this summer. Well, it's really basic so far, so nothing crazy you need to see, but you will see that Ionic offers you components that look like native components, although they are implemented in HTML and CSS, which, well, one side is that it's useful if you don't want to modify them, but once you start customizing, it will break really quickly. So in the first step that you saw in the gym app, there were no, I was intentionally skipping using Ionic components because I couldn't really customize them well. So this is a basic, well, this is a calendar which shows you the dates when a property is booked. You can ignore the listings, or you can exclude them from the calendar. And this is by the way an Ionic-based component. This likeable thing. It has a drawer. There is this menu, and if you don't want to modify them, they look pretty good. So that's it basically. It's nothing crazy, just normal iOS design. And by the way, it switches between designs. So if you are using an Android phone, it will show up as an Android design, and it uses Material Design for that. So here you can see that the buttons are a little different, and the overall outlook is different. And it also supports dark mode and light mode. And all of these took a lot of experimenting. For example, dark mode doesn't work on native Android, and I had to implement a workaround. So it does take some workarounds and other experimentation. But again, this is what I'm trying to achieve here, that there are only so many things you need to implement and so many workarounds you need to write. And once you have them, you can build on them. And I only have to maintain one code base, and all the applications will work off of that. So that is it. That's for the showcasing of the apps. And for the last part, I want to share with you what I've learned from. Well, I started using this tech last summer, so it's been roughly 9-10 months, and what I learned, what I think of this, all this technology put together, I think it's really good. Well, it does have upsides and it does have its downs. And the good part is that it's very efficient. So I think it's more suitable for startups and people who want to develop things quickly, and for both platforms, but also maybe for the web. And this way you can save money on development. You can save a lot of complexity. And because Angular and Nest.js is so similar in the way, like in coding style, and it's even the same language, I think it's a big extra that you don't need to learn different frameworks, different languages, and you can build a much more easily maintained app with this tech. Yeah, so that's the upside, and of course the downside is that it might not be the best performing setup. So for example, Nest.js is a little slower, but you can also use Fastify adapter, which makes it quite fast, and it performs really well. And most of the time, application performance depends more on the developer, how a developer organizes the code and what kind of algorithm he or she writes. And after that comes only the technology itself that is used. And by the way, I can also show you that it's the property management app is installed on my phone, and it's not at all slow. Okay, maybe this will not work, but I can show you the drawer. It comes in from the side. It's not laggy. It works pretty well. And yeah, so basically that's it. That's what I brought for you guys today. There's a lot of things to do. I did a major refactoring recently when I separated the applications into different repositories. And there's still a lot of work to do. And right now I'm working on this alone. So I don't have a lot of time for the hobby projects or stuff that are not needed for the partners whom I developed the apps for. But I hope to keep working on it, and maybe when it gets ready, I will move the base to an npm package and maybe open source it. Or, well, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also back now. So thanks, Danny, for your talk. It was great to see. I saw that you also did a lot of, so you mentioned that Angular, Ionic, Nest.js, they bring a lot of value, but you also added a ton on top of it with those special animations and other utilities that you created. So is there a timeline where you, for open sourcing these components, even into the early stage, so people can help in documenting, or are you still not sure on that part?
Well, my first priority right now is I have a couple of deadlines that I need to meet. And once I'm done with that, I will start to separate the base project more, because right now it still has some project-related code. For example, the application configs are in the base project. After that, I can start thinking about how to make this usable for others. And well, that would also benefit me, because that way I will maybe get some more support on it, and we'll be able to create something useful for mobile development.
Thanks. We also have a question from Christian. Yeah, if you can answer that in shortly, I would appreciate it, because we are running out of time.
Well, the short answer is I don't know. This one, I'm with Angular and Ionic. Of course, I don't yet know how it looks in production, because these two apps are going to be launched during the summer. And they are also, both of the partners are startups. So it's not like millions of users are going to be using it from the first day. So I have some time to experiment and see how it goes. I don't know about React. I know that some companies use it, so it depends on what you need it for.
Thanks, Danny. Any other questions? Yeah, we have one from Monica.
Suggestions for beginners. Well, you need to experiment a lot and try a lot of different stuff, and see what you like and what you find interesting, and going down that path. I think that's what works well.
Okay, I think we're out of questions. So you guys see Donny's email on the hopefully under the nameplate. I think you can reach out to him if you have further questions. As far as I know, he's kind of a polite guy. I'm sure he will get back to you. So for the last part of the evening, I will share my screen now, and we can do the raffle quickly. Okay. just hopefully you see my screen now. So as you can see, we have 5 people who signed up for the, oh, more now. What is this? Oh no, this is from last time. It's not working. Damn, I'm going to do it differently. So okay, we have 5 people who signed up for the raffle. I'm going to use a number generator. So the first winner is number 1. That's György. Ceder András, congratulations, you won a license. I will email you all the details. Our second winner of this evening is number 4. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Méreg Norbert. Congratulations, Norbert, you won the second license. I will email the license to you guys in 24 hours at most, so be patient, please. It will arrive. So thanks again, everyone, for joining this evening. Special thanks to all the sponsors, mainly to Prisma, who helped us in making this online event happen in a very professional way. So thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alex. And I also saw Daniel among the audience. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for being here. And as always, feel free to reach out to the speakers or to us, the organizers. We will be happy to respond. And I hope to see you next time in person, or at least in a hybrid setup for the meetup. Hopefully that will happen pretty soon now. And meanwhile, stay safe and see you soon. And thanks again for joining. Bye.